You're
Headlines.
talking about my salary. That's what you've been talking about.
Well, no, I'm not talking about
What's
your
that got
salary
to do
anymore.
with you?
I'm not
What
talking
has
about your
that got to
salary.
do with you? Do you want to talk about your salary?
I
How
want to
much are you
talk about
paid?
the story that has played out this week. I
How
wonder
much
if
are you
are
paid,
you,
Cathy?
I haven't hit the headlines. You've hit the headlines, Isabel.
Well, maybe if you
Let's,
broke some stories, you would.
Today, I'm joined by Isabel Oakeshott, a political journalist who leaked more than 100,000 messages gained from Matt Hancock to the Daily Telegraph and contributed to their lockdown files investigation. So she has very much hit the headlines. Isabel, good evening to you.
Hi there.
I want to take you back. What we always do with this slot is just go through someone's week. And you have had quite a week, it has to be said. So let's just go back to this time last week, the weekend coming up. Were you putting the finishing touches to the Telegraph scoop?
Yes, that's right. I mean, we've been working on this for 2 months, really, very intensively. The Telegraph put a huge team onto it, but of course, with any story as big as this, timing has to be meticulously planned. You need to make sure that you've bottomed everything out. You know, you've made sure that everything you're doing is in the public interest, and then you sort of pray that there isn't some other enormous breaking story that you can't control that then sort of knocks you off course. And you'll remember at the beginning of the week, though it feels a lifetime away to me, there was a very important story on Northern Ireland and the protocol. And so that had to sort of run its course first.
All right, so you had planned to go at the beginning of the week, had you?
Well, these things are always absolutely fluid. As I say, we've been working on this story for a couple of months, and everything was ready to go. But there's so much material that how long could this go on for? That's
You
difficult.
spied your opportunity.
2.3 million words to go through, and so many stories to write and prepare.
Right. Well, Tuesday night you were ready. You received a text from Matt Hancock. You said it was menacing. He denies it was. But what did it say?
I've already been quite open with what it said, and I really think this has been a little bit over-egged. You know, I wasn't frightened or intimidated, but at 1:20 in the morning, I got a text saying, "You have made a big mistake." Like I say, I don't want to over-egg that.
Right. But you found it a little bit, 1:20 in the morning. It's presumably you'd been...
Unsettling, let's say that. But I wasn't very settled anyway. I mean, if you're about to...
Sounds not.
To do a story like this, you're not sleeping particularly well in any case.
Right, well, we'll see how that unfolded as the week progressed. But the Telegraph lockdown files had gone live at that point. What was the immediate reaction across social media? And, your phone, was it just going off like a Christmas tree?
It hasn't actually stopped going off like a Christmas tree ever since. My best friend this week has actually been the battery pack with which I recharge my mobile phone pretty much every hour. Look, the reaction has been phenomenal. You never know quite how a project like this is going to land. And as the week's gone on, the reaction from ordinary people, which is what I care most about, has been absolutely phenomenal. I can no way keep up with the messages that are pouring in from people who suffered for one reason or another as a result of decisions that were taken during the pandemic in terms of the response. And people want to know what was really going on. And of course, a public inquiry led by a judge in the proper way is ultimately the best way to get to the full picture, and you hope that can be done and you get an objective view on things. But my concern has always been that public inquiry has such an enormously wide sweeping remit and no deadline that we're not going to get anything from that for very many years.
Right. Well, the reaction from some of your colleagues has been slightly less charitable. I mean, in particular, after the story went live, it came up at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday. You were touring the studios, really. You turned up at Talk TV. There was an interesting conversation in the green room with News UK colleagues there, wasn't there?
Well, I don't think that it's of interest to our listeners for me to talk about how my colleagues react to my scoop. That is very, very navel gazing. It's very media bubble. What matters is the content of these messages and what they reveal about the mistakes that were made and the attitude and the power hungry nature of the way we were being governed behind the scenes. I honestly, I just think a preoccupation with who's saying what about me or so on. It's not about me.
But no. But I mean, you have hit the headlines, and this slot is about you because you're the one who's in the headlines. And there was a bit of a shouting match, I hear, with Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun. I just wonder whether you understand why he was exasperated, given that you're paid a reported £250,000 a year by Talk TV, and now hang on, now producers and reporters on a fraction of your salary were having to kind of put up with your sloppy seconds and follow up the story in a rival newspaper. It's a bit galling, isn't it?
I'm just not going to go down this route, Cathy. People don't know the details of my work contracts. I'm just not going to go there. I just don't think that this is of interest to people. I think people are much more interested in what the investigation reveals. Most of our listeners won't know the individuals that you're referring to. I think it's kind of absurd that you should be quoting wild figures about my contract with any news organisation. That's my business. It's not yours.
But I'm just interested why you decided to go with the Telegraph when you do work for Talk TV, and that's in a media organisation with other newspapers.
If your focus is on this angle, I will terminate the interview now because this is not what I've come on here to talk about.
Well, I'm talking about you hitting the headlines, and this is part of the story. But I mean, let's talk about
my work arrangements are not part of the story. Actually, they're actually absolutely nothing to do with it.
So you have no qualms about taking this story to the Telegraph. You're happy with how that went?
I'm going to terminate the interview. Okay,
well, this
is my last warning. Okay, I'm going to terminate the interview. I've not come on here to justify where the story was placed or how I chose to go about that. I've come on here to talk about the story and the fact that you have started wheeling out inaccurate figures about my contract or any working arrangement I have had. I think that is frankly unprofessional.
Well, we're talking about your story that has hit the headlines.
You're talking about my salary. That's what you've been talking about.
Well, no, I'm not talking about your salary anymore. I'm not talking about your salary.
Do you want to talk about your salary?
I want to talk about the story that has played out this week.
How much are you paid, Cathy?
I haven't hit the headlines. You've hit the headlines, Isabel.
Well, maybe if you broke some stories, you would.
Well, I've broken a couple of stories this week since you mentioned it, but don't worry about that. I'm not going to go into that because I haven't hit that. This is not me being interviewed on this slot. Right. What I want to ask you, Isabel, is here we are that you've ripped up an NDA to dump Matt Hancock in it. You dumped Vicky Price in it. Wait, let me finish. She ended up going to prison on the back of correspondence with you about speeding points. You based an unsubstantiated allegation that a former Prime Minister engaged in a sex act with a dead pig on a single source. You also published text messages and emails with the Leave.eu founder Aaron Banks, which were shared with you privately. What I want to ask you, Isabel, is how can any source trust you again? Well, Isabel Oakeshott, I'm afraid, has terminated that interview. But we will now... I would have liked to know the answer to that question, but perhaps she'll come back on and tell us, or maybe she'll tell another news organisation. Perhaps she'll answer that series of questions on her Talk TV show. I would like to hear the answer to that. But that was Isabel Oakeshott talking about her week in the thick of it. And it has been a very hectic week for her.